So welcome back to another video on my channel. In this particular one, I'm going to do something slightly different where I'm going to show you more of a Flow application which I put together, and we're going to walk through exactly how it actually works. And what it is a simple OpenAI assistant chat application which allows you to store the user's chat history within inside a Supabase as well. And with a little bit of extra flavor on here as well, it also supports streaming as well. So you're going to kind of get that chat GPT like experience with inside your Flow application. Now, this particular video was produced for the Digital Pros No Code Academy. So what I've done is I've kind of linked all of the reference material and of course the final project as well with inside this YouTube video. So of course you can dive in and then you can walk through with this particular video and learn how it kind of hangs together. And hopefully you'll be able to take all of these techniques and apply in your own project as well. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's have a look at how this application works. Okay, so this particular video is all about walking through this particular sample project, which demonstrates how to have a chat history stored within inside a Supabase database, where you can provide the ability for your users to not only save the chat that they're actually having, but also as well to be able to resume the conversation at another point. Now, this application also supports streaming from a build chip, so you would kind of make all of your requests would be going into a build chip workflow. It will be then having that conversation with the OpenAI platform, and of course the information is then streamed back to Flow, and at the same time Flow is persisting that information into a Supabase database. So let me walk you through this particular sample application first before I start diving into exactly how it works. And of course please do refer back to the article within inside the No Code Academy, which walks you through the setup of the application from a Supabase perspective, but also from a Flow perspective as well. And this video is really here to complement that particular article, so I can give you a bit of an idea of how the application actually works under the covers, so then you can implement something very similar in your own application. So on screen at the moment, we've got the sample project that is running. It is connected up to my Supabase project, and it's also connected up to the build chip workflow. So let me start by just creating a brand new chat here, and you can see here I'm into this screen where I can now start having a conversation. So I'm just going to kind of just give a very simple question because my assistant is all about IT support. So I'm just going to ask a question about, what is a GPU, and just hit the send option. And that's going out to the build chip workflow right now. It's passing the prompt down into the workflow, and you can see now I'm getting that streamed response coming back. Now, incidentally, when I just typed in what is a GPU, that is created that first chat within inside the actual Supabase database. It's created an entry for me as the user. And you can see here, then I've got that response coming back. Once that response is completed, then I'm persisting that within inside the Supabase database. I'm just going to flick now to Supabase. Let's have a look and see what that looks like first. You can see here, this is my chat. So here you can see I've got a thread ID that's being created. Now I'm going to need that to continue the conversation with the OpenAI platform. I've got a simple title that just says new chat. Now, of course, you're going to probably want to add functionality into your application to provide the users the ability to rename the chat. But you can see the title is saved there. And there, of course, is the user ID that is currently signed into the application. And of course, I can now associate that chat with that particular user. Now, this is great in a multi-user application, of course, because you can query into the table here. You can say, right, please return me back all of the chats for that particular user. And of course, I can then show that to the user, and they can, of course, select that chat and then carry on with the conversation. Now, every kind of part of the chat is stored within inside this particular table. You can hear I've got a conversation table, and you can see here, this is the very first one that I've got created. This is that first one I created in there. And of course, there is the one that has come back then from the OpenAI platform. So that's a really, really simple table structure just to kind of set the scene of how this application works. So let's just flick back here. So of course I can come out here, I can just close that down now. I can go back into the chat history. It's doing that query, and I can see that I've got my new chat. Just select that, and of course I can now carry on and continue that conversation because I've got the thread ID stored. I know about the thread ID on this particular page, so I can keep having that conversation to and fro in between the workflow. And of course, I can then just continually, as I said, have that conversation. Of course, you're going to want to add in other functionality like deleting these chats if you don't need them anymore or anything like that. And of course, I can come along here, I can now create a brand new chat. And again, I can just ask a different question. Is smaller CPU case. I'm a bit out of touch with those type of differences. So there we go. It's talking about different sort of sizes and all this kind of stuff. You can see it's streaming it down quite nicely. It's not super fast, but it's enough for it to kind of come back to kind of give it that kind of chat GPT look there. But it's streaming it down, and it will allow me to hopefully come to an end and complete it. There we go. And of course I could now go in and I can say, tell me more about 4, because it knows about the conversation that I'm having. Hit send, and away it goes. There we go. So you get the idea of what it's up to. That is the application. So what I'm going to do now is move into the second part now, where we can start delving a little bit deeper into the application. Again, the documentation that supports this particular video provides all of the kind of the SQL queries that in order for you to create those particular tables to get you up and running with this particular sample. Okay, so once you've cloned this particular project, let's talk a little bit about the setup. Of course, I've got the detail within inside the written article within inside the Academy, but let's go to the clock here just to make sure we've got these set up. So the authentication should be then enabled with Supabase, and then down in the integrations, just make sure you've got your API URL and your anonymous key from Supabase, and make sure you then hit the get schema option. And you can see here are the 2 tables within inside my project. They're the only tables that I have in my particular project. And of course, you just need to obtain those from going down to the little cog here, going up to then the API option here, and then you can see here I've got the URL and the anonymous key here. So just make sure they're copied across into this particular section. So that's the configuration. That's all that you need to do here to get up and running. Let's just move back to then the widget tree. Okay, so let's now talk about the simplicity of some of these pages, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail about how they actually function under the covers. So let me just extend this out just a little bit here. Now, this particular project consists of a number of different pages. The home page is the one that you see here. This is just a really, really simple sample app. Of course, yours would look a lot nicer than this. And on the home page, I've got these couple of different buttons here. Now, these do have different actions underneath them that is going to kind of do a couple of different things. So the chat history is the easiest one to explain. So let's just pop into there. This is just doing a simple navigation to the chat page itself. Sorry, the history page itself. And you can see here that I've got my previous conversations. This is just doing a lookup and saying, right now, please bring me down all of the chats from my database table for this specific user. You saw that previously in the previous segment on the actual user ID. That's all I'm filtering on with inside my application. Of course, I'm signed in. I know who I am as a user, so I have that user ID. So I'm just doing a simple lookup here, and that is presented up here. So I just go down to the conversation list here. You can see here I'm saying user ID equals a user ID, and I'm just doing these in a kind of descending order. So the new one is at the top. Now, there is an action that is just behind this, which is going to navigate off to then the chat page. And what I'm doing here is I'm just going to pass across the chat ID. So if I just go here, you can see here as I'm just going to navigate across, I'm just passing the parameter of the ID. So that's the actual row itself, the chat row here, and that will allow me then to, once I enter the chat page, I can then do some lookup and get some detail about that chat, and then I can then use that on that particular page. That's going to be really important because I'll explain another use where I'm using that in a slightly different way in just a moment. So once that's done, then let's now move back to then the home page itself, and let's talk about that a little bit in the start new chat. So what I'm going to do is when I'm going to hit the start new chat, what I'm doing is I'm creating a stub record within inside my Flutterflow database. And if I just, within inside my Supabase database, if I say start new chat, if I just look at these specific actions, I just open up that here, you can see here that what I'm doing, the first thing I'm going to do as soon as they hit that button is I'm going to insert a brand new row inside my chat table. And this is just going to be of the user ID, and I'm just hard coding there the title of new chat. And of course that could be a date and time, it could be something like that, but I'm just going to hard code in there the actual just new chat title. And then I've got this action output variable name, so this is going to return me back the row that is just got created. So I'm just going to check to make sure it's set. Now it should be, there shouldn't be any issues or anything like that. I should get the ID back, and then of course I can then navigate to the chat page. I'm just going to pass the ID that I got coming back. So you can see here that I'm just going to pick out out that ID that comes back from the action output here, and you can then see I can then pass that into the chat page. So it doesn't matter whether I do this via the chat history or I do it via this specific area here. I'm creating a brand new chat record, because once I've got that, then it means I've then got a record that I can associate the conversation with. So that's super important. So just hit close. So both these buttons then will then carry out that action then into the chat page in some form or shape or another. So when we then now go into that particular chat page, this is where all of the main stuff happens. Okay then, so up the top there, you can see I've got these page parameters here. This is quite important. I've got the ID. So this is what's going to sort of capture that ID that is I'm feeding into this particular page, because I'm going to need that right off the bat. And if you look at the actual chat page at the top here, you can see I've got a little action here. I've got a number of actions that's going on. So if I just click on that and click on open, you can see that the first thing I'm going to do is then do a lookup for the chat information. So I just need to kind of get that stub record and get the details of that. And once I've kind of picked out the first one, I'm then going to update the actual page state. So I've got some page state variables on this particular page where I've got the thread ID. So I'm going to need to make sure that I store the thread ID. Now, initially that thread ID will likely be empty, because when it's the brand new chat, then of course there won't be any thread ID within inside the database. That gets set slightly later on the completion of the actual conversation. So this is just making this will just set it if it's available, and I'm also setting the title as well. So this will kind of be sort of null. This will be of the title of new title, which I've kind of hard coded in. Now once I've got that, then I need to then do a query for the actual conversation. So this is a super important part, because of course this is all of your chat history. So if you've come back here before, then this query is going to return back all of the records for the conversation. You can see here that if I go on the filter, I'm just filtering on the chat ID, which of course is passed into the actual page itself. So you can see here I've got this action output variable here of conversation results. That should bring me back all of the conversation records, and then of course I'm then updating the page state. I'm then just setting another page state variable that I've got here, which is really just a list of rows of type conversation from that particular result itself. So that should be quite straightforward for you. Just doing a little wait here, just waiting for the kind of the UI to kind of just kind of update and repaint, and then I'm just going to then do a scroll to the bottom of the scrolling column on the actual page itself. So if I just close that and I go to the scrolling column here, if I just sort of minimize that here, you can see that this is kind of my scrolling area here. So once all of this gets filled up with chat history, I just want to make sure that I move to the very last, the actual last one in the actual list itself. Okay, so before we get into the nuts and bolts of this particular page, let's talk about a few other things which is just important to orientate yourselves with. I've got the chat page selected here. Let's move over to the local page state variables. Let's quickly talk about these. Here's the thread ID. This is going to be important, because when that is available to us, we're going to want to keep passing that back and forth our build chip workflow. We've got an is loading Boolean indicator. Of course, if there's a network operation happening, then it's useful to kind of set that to true or false, because we might want to kind of on the UI kind of display some kind of loading indicator. Here is our list of conversation. This is the bit that's in the middle here, and I've got this page state variable here, which is a Supabase row of type Supabase row, but it's of conversation. This is going to be really important to us, because as we are receiving that streamed response, I'm going to want to kind of add this to the end of this particular list. Now, of course, I'll cover that a little bit more in just a moment, but just to set the scene here, I'm going to need this just as a page state variable, so I can kind of update it with the content that's coming back from the build chip workflow. And then here is our title, which is this bit up here. That's just going to get set when the page is then sort of loaded here, which is kind of what we discussed earlier on that page state update. So that's that. Let's just talk a little bit about then our app state variable. This is as it was in a previous series of mine where I was demonstrating how to use the streaming from build chip. Here is the stream response. So as that stream is coming back from workflow, as we're sort of building up the content, then it's going to be loaded inside this app state variable, which of course I'm going to use very shortly with inside that page state variable, which I just showed you just a moment ago, go for that single row that's going to then be added onto here. So that is our page state variable. Just very briefly looking at the widget tree here, there's nothing special going on here. I'm just going to kind of collapse these down here. So here is the conversation. It's got the chat column. I've got the AI response row, which is here on the left hand side, and I've got the user response row on the right hand side. So that is just set up nice, and I've got some code expressions here which will determine when they get displayed, so feel free to have a look at those. Again, nothing different from any of the previous stuff that I've done. And I've got the text field down here with then the send button, which I'm going to now cover in a little bit more detail. Okay, so let's talk about then the action that's on this send button. This is where kind of all of the work happens inside our application. So just with it selected, move over to the actions, open up the action flow editor, and let me talk very briefly about how all of this works. So the first thing I'm going to do here is update our is loading Boolean indicator. I'm just going to toggle the value. It's false by default. I'm going to set it to true here. And then the next step, the first thing I'm going to do is insert into my Supabase database the conversation, the prompt that I've just added into this conversation. So you can see here is I'm just doing a simple insert row. I'm going to pass in the chat ID, which is passed into the page. Here is the type, and now this is going to be of uppercase user, and then the content is going to be the value from my sort of text field that I've got there that's going to carry the prompt. Super simple. And of course, I'm then going to get this action output variable name here, which is a user conversation result, which is going to be the brand new row that's just been created. So that's that. Now with this here, we're going to add the user chat to our history. So what we're going to do is we're now going to take this row and we're now going to add it quite simply to our conversation list here. So we can add it to list, and we've got it here. Now remember, what we're kind of doing is we're kind of like, although we are creating the rows in the database, what we're not doing is we're not going back to the database to kind of refresh. We're going to kind of save ourselves from doing that, because what we can do here is we can kind of add to our own list within inside our application. So this is kind of what this is doing here. This is going to save a network call, which is going to be great. We don't want to be doing unnecessary kind of network calls over the wire. So by getting that result that comes back, I can add it myself to that user chat history. Now then, we've now got this add an empty system chat. Now what I need to do is I now need to create or at least the stub of the response is going to come back from OpenAI. Even though at this particular point we've had nothing come back yet from OpenAI, I'm going to want to create a row in my database ready for us to kind of update those particular details. So what I'm doing here is I'm just going to pass in the chat ID again. I'm going to set the type as system, because it's going to come back obviously from the system itself. And then here is the content, which is just going to be completely empty at this particular stage. So that's just a stub record that we are going to create. You can see here that my action output variable will be the row that gets created, and it's the latest system chat result. There's going to be a variable that's going to be available to me within inside my workflow. Now what I can now do is I can now take the row itself here and do something very similar to what I did up here, is then add that to the page state variable. So I'm just going to add it to the list, which is going to be the conversation, the history that I've got here. So I'm just going to add that in. So that's going to be kind of ready and waiting for me. Now I'm going to scroll now down. So I've got the scroll to, so I'm just going to go to my scrolling column. I'm just going to push down to the bottom there. And then I'm next going to then talk about this particular custom action. Okay, so in one of my previous videos, I created a custom action that's going to kind of perform all of the interaction with BuildShip itself. And I'll just briefly mention about that here. So just on the left hand side, I've got the custom code, I've got stream response, and here is exactly the same custom function. Nothing has been changed here. So that should be all true if you were following that previous sort of video. So I'm not going to change too much or talk about too much here. But you can see here I've got lots of kind of callbacks which we're going to kind of use very, very shortly. And this is the bit that's going to do all of the interaction between Flutter Flow and the workflow that I've got within inside BuildShip itself. And while we're on the subject of BuildShip, here is the streaming system workflow here. Now there's been no changes to this at all. So again, as true to the previous video, you should just be able to reuse this in this particular application. Okay, so then back with inside the action flow editor, here is the custom action. I've got it selected here on the right hand side. Let's talk about some of these properties that it's set. You can see here, this is the URL of our build chip workflow, which I just showed you in the previous section, which is obviously deployed. And then here I've got the prompt. This is the value that I'm going to pass into that particular build chip workflow here, the prompt that the user is typing. And of course, here is the thread ID. Of course, if it's available, I'm going to pass that in through this particular property itself. So that's all super straightforward, nothing particularly detailed there to talk about. And of course, up here now, this is kind of where some of the magic happens now in terms of the way that these particular callbacks are working. So the on-stream callback is what's happening every time we receive a little bit of data that's coming back from the workflow itself. Then the on-stream callback will continually be invoked, and of course this is what we're going to use to build up our last row within our chat history with that streamed response. On error, of course, is just quite straightforward in as far as that if there's an error or whatever, then I can do something inside my application. So I'm not going to worry too much about the detail here. And of course, once everything is done, once all of the information has been retrieved back from the workflow itself, then of course I can carry out a number of different actions on the complete callback. So let's now firstly talk about then the on-stream callback and what that is actually doing for us. So just hit the open here. So let's firstly set the update app state variable. So here, there's nothing that is being set at all here. I'm just kind of forcing an app state rebuild here. I explained more about that on the previous video that I created, so we don't need to worry too much about that. Just make sure you've kind of got that set. There's no value set or anything like that. I'm just saying update app state. I'm kind of just forcing a kind of rebuild of the app state within inside my application. And then I've got the update page state. Now this is where it gets a little bit more involved in terms of what we are actually doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the very last kind of like chat history kind of row within inside my actual chat history. This is, I kind of added that stub previously that I was talking about. Once I've got that, what I'm going to want to do is I want to gradually add the streamed response to it. And this is exactly what I'm doing here is, so here I'm getting the item index. What I'm doing, I've got a code expression here, which is just quite simply getting the very last item in the list. Once I've kind of got that row itself, then I'm going to want to then do something with it. So here I'm going to pull it out the one that I need, and then I've got this kind of custom function. This is what I just showed you earlier on. This custom function is being called, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this particular last row into that custom function, as well as the actual streamed response that's coming back here. So this streamed response is being set within inside the custom action that I showed you briefly earlier. That's going to be added to, so all of the content is going to come back is going to be within inside the stream response. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep adding that to this Supabase row here. So that's important. And what I've got here is this is the custom function that I'm being called update system Supabase row. So if you go and kind of look at that custom function, you'll see here that all I'm doing is I'm passing in the actual row itself, and then I'm adding that streamed content back to it. Now, of course, all I'm doing therefore is just kind of gradually updating as the stream response comes back. And of course, that's going to be on the last item within inside my chat history. So I can kind of simulate that kind of stream response that's coming back. And of course, I'm going to keep scrolling. Of course, I'm going to keep moving down here. So every time the stream is coming in, I'll keep scrolling the kind of the widget, the actual UI to the bottom, to the end. So it looks like it just keeps moving up all the time. So that's what the on-stream callback will do for us. So I'll just close that down there. Let's open up the actions again. Let's just move down here because we have to do it kind of this way. Click on custom action, and then let's go to the on complete callback. So this is once everything is all done and we have everything completed on the stream. So just open here. Let's talk about this. So the first thing I'm going to do is clear out the text that the user is typing into that particular field. And then now I'm going to do a backend call update. So this is where I just need to set the thread ID of the chat. So this is the kind of the chat table, the row that I got in, then I've got that thread ID that kind of comes back on the complete callback. We're returning back the thread ID, and I need to now set that within inside my database. So that means that I can then carry on that conversation at another time. It's available to us. So I'm just updating the row there, of course. Now, if I just look here, if I go to the matching rows on the filter, you can see here I'm just passing in the ID here, and of course this is the chat ID. So I'm just pulling that out of the actual page state, or the page component, sorry, the page state variable itself. So once we've got that, the page state variable, yeah, that's fine. And then update the page state itself. So this is where I'm just now setting the page itself. We've got the thread ID, so I'm just going to set the page itself, the thread ID, and I'm just going to turn the is loading indicator back to false again. So I'm just going to toggle that back. And then finally, I'm going to update the rows within inside the actual conversation itself. So what we're doing kind of here is we're kind of matching. We know that previously we kind of, this is the actual conversation itself. So we had this ID, so this was kind of returned back on the latest system chat result earlier on. So if you look back in the video, we were kind of capturing this as a variable. Well, this is the newly created record. This is the ID that we got returned to us. So what I just need to do here is I just simply need to kind of get this record from our database there, and of course I'm just going to set the content. This is the kind of the stream response. So this is the complete stream, all of the content that's come back. I'm just going to update our database record with that result that comes back. And then finally, update the app state. I'm going to clear the stream response. We've loaded that up. We don't need that anymore, so I'm just going to clear that down. And then and finally, I'm then just going to scroll to the end just for good measure. So that is the onComplete callback. Just move back in here. I don't think there's anything more to kind of sort of cover here on this particular bit. We mentioned we didn't need to cover the error. So I think that is good for our actions. So that is simply how this application works. You should be able to get this up and running really, really easily yourself by kind of following kind of everything that's kind of set out in this particular video, maybe bit by bit, if you're trying to rebuild this from scratch inside your application. So good luck with that. Let me know if you get any problems with inside the actual academy itself. I'm interested to see how you've kind of implemented this, and hopefully it will work for you as well. Please come and join the Digital Pros private no-code academy. The link is in the description.